my great pleasure to introduce Natalja Deng, who's going to speak about an experience-based interpretation of the A versus B.
Right. I want to start.
Want to use the mic?
Now you can do that. Okay. So I want to start by kind of talking about a few names that hope these are fairly familiar. Okay, so say that time may or may not pass. That is, it may or may not have a dynamic aspect of phase lags. May or may not know. I'm going to use these terms interchangeably here. And in this talk, I'm not going to talk at all about tenseless passage views, although I like those very much. Try to locate a dynamicity or passage within the block universe. I'm not talking about those here at all. In other words, I mean by passage in this talk something A-theoretic. And by A-theoretic, again, I'm simplifying a whole huge landscape hearing a lot about. I mean that all sorts of A-theoretic views posit a sui generis process that time has that involves, let's say, a transfer of metaphysical privilege from time to time. Being a present, being a time that exists, being the latest time that exists. So I'm thinking of this question, of this opposition, non-dynamic versus dynamic views as B versus A. And here's another question. We may or may not have experiences as of time passing. Of course, experience here can also mean all sorts of different things. I'm going to distinguish, or I'm going to lead by this, just this time perceptual temporal experience. So in other words, I'm thinking of something that unfolds over a moment-to-moment time series. I'm setting aside, let's say, medium to long-term aspects of temporal experience that might also involve cognitive aspects of temporal experience, such as our common sense beliefs about time, or common sense pictures. So that's what I mean. And now, I think that, a very kind of common way to think about this question is that one is a question about what time is like, question of metaphysics, and the other is a question about how we experience time. Different fields are orthogonal issues. So that means that we combine these freely and we get these four positions. I'll say a little bit more about what I mean by this A-theoretic experience in a moment, but roughly, you can be an A-theorist and think that we have experience as a time passing. You can, prima facie, in logical state, we have all these positions, we can be A-theorists and think that we do not have those experiences, and similarly for the B. So I think that that's a fairly familiar view or widespread view that these are orthogonal issues, and that therefore we do get all of these positions in logical or logical space. And I think the orthogonality claim there rests on an even more basic conviction that this distinction that we started out with, the A versus B distinction, time as dynamic, time as non-dynamic, is intelligible independently of considerations related to temporal experience. So I think that this is a very basic conviction. Nonetheless, in this talk, I'm exploring an interpretation on which that's not the case. And in particular, this will be an anti-realist interpretation of the A versus B distinction in the following sense: that the A theory is a view that posits a process partly defined through an appeal of experience, and the B theory is a view that says this process doesn't exist. I mean this as a descriptive claim, not a revisionary one. I I come to think that this is a good way to make sense of significant parts of the literature. Now, this interpretation has some snapshots that are apparently compatible. When namely, two of those views are not no longer in logical space. Of these two, I'm going to worry much more about 4 than about 2 because I think it's more populated. And 4 is going to occupy me quite a bit. Yeah, I'm going to refer to 4 roughly as deflationism. Really, deflationism as a label, I think, it's not intended to include the B theory in it, but that will matter for my purposes. Nearby labels for 4 are radicalism, cognitive error theory. I'll come to all that later. So here's something I'm going to be relying on. And I'll start by telling you about that. I'll be relying on a claim about, say, an ambiguity in the term B theory or local university between what I'll call the official B theory and what I'll call sort of meta B stance. The B theory, I'll suggest, is a positive metaphysical view about the nature of reality. And I think that it affirms that that time lacks passage. Meta B rejects the claim time passes because it takes an unhelpful trade in eternality. I'll say much more about this in a moment, but already you can probably tell that meta B is the sort of stance that can be, and I think often is, also held by philosophers who don't think that philosophy of time should base itself on an analytic factor. So here's the plan. I'll tell you something about this distinction that I want to make, some other preliminaries, and then there'll be a limited defense of something Simon Prosser had said, where I'll say that experience cannot represent A qua A or B qua B, saying more about what I mean by that. In the third part, another limited defense of some of the things Simon Prosser said, why the meaning of passage and passage is partly defined through an appeal to experience. And I'll tell you how I think this supports an anti-realist interpretation of the distinction. And then in the fourth part, I'll get onto this fourth position that I just said, the anti-realist interpretation kind of rolled out by Fiat, that's called deflationism, held by more and more B-theorists. And I'll argue that what looks like B-theory plus B-theoretic experiences is really what originally intended really as for only on meta reading. And so in that way, to my mind, this actually supports inherent. Okay, so what I'm suggesting here is that we distinguish between the B theory, which I think is a position within the ABC debates, and meta B, which is a stance about those debates. I'm not going to say much about the C's here, but just so that you know, that meta B position about those Guardian. Okay, so meta B as a sense, I think rejects the claim time passes without justifying that with the further claim that time is passage free, that time is such that it lacks temporal passage. It says it's not helpful to trade in A terminology. I'm suggesting that meta B, unlike B, I'll get onto that in a moment, mentions A terminology but doesn't use it. I think that if one thinks passage and other A terminology is not intelligible, or in similar ways, very semantically effective, that constitutes a move to meta B. Now, I wouldn't want to deny that frames of meta B can talk of a succession of times. But I think that they mean something mean by something much less metaphysically committed than a B-theorist does. For example, no more and no less than is meant by corresponding claims in physical theories, theory, as used there. And here the thought is that as used there, that kind of talk is not yet laden with B's any more than it's laden with A's. And just a little bit of a justifying thought for that. There, I think we could also talk about those tenseless passage approaches that aim to locate sadness within the B theory. So, flip side of the coin. Here's actions I'm imposter on the B theory. The B theory says that no time is metaphysically privileged, the present is not special, and that therefore the world is a kind of four-dimensional block with no objective presence and no passage of time. Whereas B theory is the view that the world is a static block of events ordered by the early event, later event, simultaneous with relations, which moment is present doesn't change because the phrase is the present and now do not take out a metaphysically special feature of the world. In other words, time is such that it doesn't pass, it doesn't contain facts process that the A theory. One objection might occur to you immediately, which is, what about formulations of B theory that don't really rely on a vocabulary? This formulation is an exhaustive catalog of which events occur and how they are temporally related, a complete account of temporality. I find B-theorists as someone who answers this question in affirmative. The imagined exhaustive description of the temporal relatedness of events is assumed to be tenseless, only once and for all, from no temporal point of view. What I want to say about this is that in order to understand what that means, what we're saying there, we do need the contrast. We need the contrast to what it would be for this description, imagined exhaustive description, not to hold once and for all. And that is what particularly goes on to kind of do a lot of work to formulate what that could be, a change in the tense facts. So in other words, my reaction to this is that this is the official B theory as I'm thinking of it. It still says that time lacks temporal passage. Another objection you might have isn't meta B. Let's say you don't think about that as a sense, and maybe it's a little too narrow. Isn't that also the nature of time? I'm saying and somehow kind of ruling it out well. So the question then would be, what is it a view about? If it is a metaphysical view of some kind, then I think the question, the metaphysical question that it answers would first have to be identified. And here I think so we talk in terms of spatial flow metaphors. These ways of talking about time play a role in many languages. We know that now, and I'll say that I'll come back to this fact again and again. And it is important. That is kind of the starting point for all of this in a way. But I think that it takes a lot of metaphysical work to formulate the metaphysical questions, that question of ethnicity, the various answers to it, and so on. What we end up with is a highly theoretical dispute. So I think that, just pronouncements about, for example, this we just move by, or just talk of succession in other disciplines, I think by themselves don't find a physical question. So then I would say we need to know the first what a question. Here's other preliminaries. I'm assuming here that perceptual temporal experiences have representational contents, but I don't think I'm assuming anything about whether phenomenal character, what it's like, reduces to that content. In a bit more detail, here's what I mean by A-theoretic experiences. So I said experiences as the time passing. I mean experiences that transparently present time as if it passes, as if it were dynamic. In other words, that encourage the judgment or put one in a position to judge that time is dynamic. Similarly, for B-theoretic experiences where you have only B-theoretic experience. And that's what I'll say is not actually available in space. And already maybe a little bit perhaps that with the claim which says merely that it's not the case that we experience times passing. Get onto that in the final section. Now, I think that, to begin with, if you think about those four positions that I outlined, the first thing that we notice is that there's something really rather implausible about all of them. If we mean by A-theoretic experiences or B-theoretic experiences that these experiences transparently reveal that times like this because it's that highly theoretical pursuit. Yeah, and so here's where I want to make use of some things that professors argued for. So in his book, Experiencing Time, he argues for a very strong claim that it's impossible to experience passage, even if it exists, even if our world is A-theoretic. I want to leave that to one side. I think in this discussion, there's also a weaker version, and that's what I'm interested in defending. It's possible to transparently experience passage, qua passage, and that also means A properties, qua A properties. I think that for the reasons I just mentioned, 1W enjoys some initial plausibility. Just a pause on that, independently of the arguments. Okay, this process is the multi-detector argument. Okay, so he, I would say, focuses on the global metaphysical, extra-physical nature of A properties such as passage, and comes to the view that in order for anything to be a detector of passage, mental or physical, passage would have to have a selective influence on that thing. By which he means that thing and not some other detector, not some other element of experience, has to be caused by passage to go on. And that thing and not some other detector element of experience has to be such that if time didn't pass, it wouldn't go on. So causal and counterfactual dependence, that has to be differentially available there. Those are just features of perception, he says, and we don't have that with passage because it's metaphysical causes. Okay, so I mean, Jeff B has one objection to this, says perceptual considerations can't really bear this argumentative weight. Says, suppose someone claimed to perceive that light as an electromagnetic wave. He says we would want to disagree with that, but why? Not because we're not differentially sensitive to whether it is an electromagnetic wave. So I'm on the side of professor here who replies that is exactly the problem. Suppose that someone was in that position, they would have an additional vision that they could feel electric and magnetic fields, and thus feel if you're vibrating whenever that was present. Okay, so I think that that objection is not serious. Maybe more serious construct objections. Okay, why should we agree with the differential sensitivity constraint at all in the first place? Right? What if we think, and this has a whole a long history of discussions along those lines, that passage is a necessary precondition for experience. However, as Professor also points out, I think the point is, let's really keep in mind that what we're after here is perceptual detection. We're perceiving that time passes in that A-theoretic sense. And I think, the reply is, if that's all, if the necessary precondition bit is all that it takes for perceptual detection of perception, then we are always in every given element of perception, including ones that come and go, perceiving all necessary preconditions of experience. The value curve, x constant has the value it has, what have you. And there starts to manage a little bit more likely that what we're doing here is thoroughly safe. Rather than perceiving that. Independently of process arguments, I think that it's worth noting that various other kinds of arguments that have been made that have been made are right in the vicinity of this. I have made arguments to the effect that A-theoretic explanatory resources can't do their job. I remember, say, Great Calendar, and so on. Lots of people in various different ways making this point that A-theoretic explanatory resources can't account for the nature of temporal experience, even though that's exactly what they were supposed to do. And the reasons are usually exactly the ones that the process has. Namely that they are, it's a metaphysical quality. Okay, well, now, also thinks this is good news for B-theorists, and of course it's understandable why the B-theorist was never in a position to argue for their view on the basis of experience. He says, look, the B-theorists can at least be confident that there are different times, that each time is just as real, and so on, as the one that we're at. And that's really all that's required for some version of the B-theory to be true. And here I think it's really important to distinguish between B and meta B, because there is a sort of default position, default fallback position here, but it's meta B, not B. I think that at that point, if the official B theory is intended as it is, then the situation is symmetric. Experience cannot represent a lack of passage, or a lack of passage either, for the same reasons. Fundamentally tenseless view. And I think the same goes for the arguments I just mentioned by Calendar and others. Just didn't really show up because the theorists didn't need to make those arguments. So suppose that we accept one W there. Experience is not metaphysically specific, it doesn't present us with reasons. Conceptual experience doesn't present us minus A or B. So now let me come to sort of intelligibility considerations, which I think that's an important insight contained in Cross's section. But again, I want to weaken and symmetrize what he said there. So from his his possible experience in the passage, he infers the A theory is not merely false but unintelligible. Why? Because we have no way to understand the term passage or other A terms other than through the experience. Okay, so what I want to do is weaken this experience content in time and say the passage is partly defined through an appeal to experience. Because of course, Professor recognizes that the meaning terms we see their meaning. Holistic network, and he said this kind of term doesn't play a theoretical role. I don't mean to say that. Of course, it does play a theoretical role within metaphysics. Nonetheless, the reason I find this plausible is, again, that even though this is a highly theoretical dispute, the anchor is always those spatial flow metaphors and temporal experience. That is what drives all the model building. That is what, ultimately, really, I think, has to be there in order for us to know what we're talking about. The passage and other terminology. That's what I just said. So that's why I want to hold on to that. And so now, follow me with all that. What happens? Okay, so one W. That weakened was that perceptual experience is not metaphysically specific, right? And now I'm saying the meaning of passage terminology has to be partly fixed through an appeal to experience. So from that, it does not follow that we can't understand the term passage, right? But what does follow is the following, or let's say what solution that's open here, I think to by this is the following. So there needs to be an appeal to experience. And because of 1W, the appeal can't find passage in experience. However, passage, I think, might partly receive its meaning through an appeal to experience because we choose to give it meaning partly on that basis. In other words, this is passage right now. We're all familiar with it. But this is what it is for an event to series to project in the present and to receive it in the past. You might think, I don't know if this is for you at all, but you might think that how does that go together? How can experience be by definition dynamic if experience is not specific? So again, the idea is that metaphysical content is not found in experience, but brought to it. Tied to the point of metaphysical term art partly on that basis. Here's a different objection. Why, if we can do it, partly through extension, why don't we do that with B terminology? And who says we don't? This is all making descriptive claim. And I think there the answer for me is that only part of the meaning is fixed this way. There is also the fact that the B-theory, the picture theory, makes a, let's say, negative core claim. It's a positive influence view, but it makes a negative core claim. It says that time is unlike something. And that thing, I think, is partly through the field experience. So that's what I mean by anti-realist interpretation. Anti-realist side of it would be the B-theory, and realist and the A-theory. And actually, I mean, I told you I'm making it to sort of things, so this won't surprise you. I do find this in the literature, even more so as you go backwards in time to the literature. But I mean, for example, Prost himself says, to begin with, according to the B-theory of time, none of the apparent dynamic features of time are real. By dynamic features, I mean roughly those apparent features of time for which there is no spatial analog. And I find this elsewhere. Okay, now, what about those cornerstone states that we're losing here? And like I said, I'm going to focus on 4. So, B-theory plus B-theoretic experiences. What do we make of that? I want to make use of the definition of deflationism in one of Juliana's papers, which I think contains a really interesting perspective on deflationism with the reading. So I will disagree with something, but it's a very subtle disagreement, if at all, I think. So here's how I understand that discussion. We start with the truism that we believe time passes because we feel that it passes, right? And this, from this, then we formulate the first working hypothesis. There is a feature ET of the phenomenal character or experience that corresponds to what it's like of the feeling that time passes. Which is to the top of this slide, so that you have it right there. I'm going to focus on just those parts of the paper that I want to engage with here. So really helpful technology. Let's just focus on the deflationists, the main rival of the paper. So the idea is, if I understand correctly, that the deflationist rejects FWH because they don't think that there is a specific phenomenal character ET of that kind that corresponds to what it's like for the feeling that time passes, but they accept the truism, which is of course intended to be theory neutral. That's why we started. Now, the thought is that this leaves deflationists to the origin problem. If one denies that there is a specific ET, the issue of the origin of the belief that time passes, ordinary belief that time passes, is no longer trivial. So it's trivial that the feeling of the passage of time gives rise to the belief that time passes, but it is not equally trivial that something that is mistaken for the feeling of the passage of time gives rise to the belief that time passes. Okay, so something that is mistaken for the feeling of the passage of time gives rise to the belief that time passes. And here I would like to go back to a paradigmatic statement of deflationism in Professor Hurl's work. So we're considering deflations as saying, first actually, let me say which ones which are meant. So remember this contrast that often is made at this point between, let's say, seeing the second hand move and noticing that the hour hand has moved. Okay, the idea is that, of course, for the deflationists, sorry, there's so many quotes, but this one I want to talk about exactly what I think the term means there. The idea of the phenomenology of passage as an ingredient in perceptual experiences of movement and change involves a conflation between the correct thought that only some changes can be perceptually experienced, namely second hand moving, right? Our hand moving is too slow to experience, and a correct thought that some perceptual experiences involve not just an awareness of change, but an awareness of some special further animated qualities. So I interpret this, I think, a little bit differently. I take this point to be that only some experiences, when compare to others, give rise to the mistaken belief that any experiences involve a feeling of passage. So, to put this in context a little bit again, I think one thing that is in the paper by friend that I'm discussing is the idea that this kind of makes counterexamples because we also think that the upper hand involves hand passing. So I think that what the deflationist is saying there is really they're not on board with the starting point, with the truism that we think time passed because we feel it passing, at least not when this is construed in the relevant sense. I mean, again, we can talk about past, passage, and so on in a way that it comes up in ordinary talk, that we can actually be. So I think in order to link it back to all these sections, what we need meaning is the A-theoretic sense. And there, I think what the deflationist is saying there is it's not just a cognitive error. It's not just that we're kind of under some cognitive illusion that with some of our experience, involve feeling passage. It's a theoretical error. Perhaps some philosophers claim that perceptual experience presents us with something that they typically refer to as temporal passage. And then he says, amongst philosophers holding this view, there's a debate, and blah, blah, blah. And I think it's basically the A versus B debate he's talking about. I want to explore the possibility that this debate may be predicated on mistake. And just as an aside, I think that this also makes sense of why he sees an intelligible ability problem there. But so what I'm saying is that deflationism is not on board with the starting point because it's aligned with metaphysical. It's an exit strategy of the A versus B debate. And the claim about temporal experience, I think, is correspondingly minimal. There is no passage phenomenology, or even there is no passage phenomenology. So, as I said a moment ago, there are now versions of deflationism that attribute a widespread error to the folk. But I think the original concern was to explain what this first means. Okay, here's a final worry. Kind of interpreted in this light. Doesn't that kind of overlook the points or the kind of positive contribution of deflationism made? Well, I think we could also look at the point that I was saying that meta content has been underappreciated. The point is that I think the deflationist arguments were always defensive in character. They tended to establish that, contrary to A-theorists, there were no positive reasons to think we experienced passively. In other words, we merely experience succession. That doesn't mean that in temporal experience we experience something less than we might have. Rather, it means that there's nothing lost by describing temporal experience as by saying merely that we experience succession. And so I'm saying that we can easily make sense of this as thinking of it as paired with the strands that actually tends to step away from the ABCs. And well, another kind of little bit of, to my mind, correlation is that one doesn't define definitions also philosophers who don't engage with these analytic categories. And well, almost not actually. Here are the conclusions, or things that I will list, and here I want to make this distinction. Said experience is not metaphysically specific, and realist interpretation. In other words, then the A versus B section is not independently considerations relating to temporal experience, and yeah, definitions is a kind of implicit strategy relating.
And the budget, I think we only have one. You want to keep that? Or you want to use it? Like the cons when you start.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. Thank you so much for that talk. I really appreciate it. Really enjoyed that. I really also enjoy the way you've parsed the experience from the theory. I think that is very useful. It's actually nice to look at it. I'm wondering if you can go back a little bit to there's a part where you had A theory plus B theoretic experience. And I think you discounted that in some way that no one would ever have that sort of view, or and so I'm trying to get into what exactly you meant by A theory is. That is a belief that they had, and then they had B theoretic experience. Is that the idea? If that's the case, then I want to put out the possibility of someone experiencing having experience that's B theoretic, but having A theory beliefs. I think that one example might be certain people with severe depression might have B theoretic experience, but hold on to A theoretic beliefs just because they don't have any motivation to change their views.
Yes. Sorry, I thought that you were going to ask something slightly different. So I think about that case, I would say, so that's not quite what I meant. What I meant by this is the view which, it's a view about what's going on with someone like that who's suffering that pathology, and all of us. And it's a view both about metaphysics and about temporal experience, namely that A theory is true of the world, but we don't have experience as a time pattern. We in general. And now, of course, I can't rule out somebody might say this. I guess I'm put in mind a little bit of this sort of idea that I sometimes hear that you wouldn't really even expect the A-theoretic process to show an experience. Let's say if you link it to what's going on in the dynamic interpretation of set theory or so, like am I kind of noticing stochastic growth of space time here? No. But so I think that there I would be inclined to think that there are also points at which the meaning of the term is stretched sufficiently that I would think it's a new debate. I think we wouldn't want to rule that out.
Thank you very much. So I have 2 points to make. So one is about a minor issue in your response to Prosse at one point. So you said that, that one could argue against Prosse that just as one can't, experience passage, one also can't experience lack of passage. So the B-theorist doesn't have any clear advantage in that respect. So can't Prosse then, reply by saying that, absences in general can't really be experienced at all. We should distinguish between, absence of experience. Suppose that you're in a room where there is no auditory stimuli at all, so you don't hear any sounds. But that doesn't mean that you really have a positive experience that has as its content absence of sound, but rather you don't have any experience of a certain form. Even if you're in another sense experiencing something else, being in a state in which you don't have any exploratory experience and so on. So that might be a response to that. So, and the second point is, why do you want to associate this deflationism about passage or passage in experience, so experiential passage, with this metaphysical stance about this ABC point, as you call it? So, because I mean, one might be skeptic about this whole experience of passage business. One might think that there's no such thing as, I mean, there's no specific thing that we might call in experiential content passage, but there is still perfectly, I mean, reasonable debate about whether time itself is A time or B time, and you don't really need to refer to passage to distinguish between these theories. You can, for instance, do that in terms of fundamentality of change, whether change can be explained in a way without any appeal to non-changing facts and so on and so on. So that would be, I mean, don't you just keep those things too close to each other?
I don't know why I give you this thing. You just hold it and speak in the other direction.
Okay, let me start with the first. So I think I'm not really. So when you say that a processor could just respond by saying, we can perceive absences. So I don't think I'm really saying to him there can be. And so in that particular argument, I'm not really disagreeing with. The idea that in some sense B-theoretic stuff is experience, some sense of B-theory, and it's more that I'm saying by his own lights, because he can agree with that, but so he kind of makes a very big deal of the fact that A properties are about the fundamental level of temporal reality. They're about what time is like at that level, and that is why most Victor arguments still on the kind of experience. So I want to say that that point holds there also. Let me say something about the second point also. Yeah, thank you for. I mean, so I think this is a point at which I can try to say a bit more about. So you're basically formulating the standard interpretation. I would say that is the standard. That is kind of the starting point. This is a distinction that is a theoretical distinction in metaphysics. We can understand it independently, or let's put it this way. I think maybe the disagreement comes down to whether understanding really even matters to the meaning or something like that. I think that's where I'm coming from. And I think we can formulate all sorts of things, but I guess it seems to me that we're understanding them when I think when we're intending them in an intended way, that there is that need to experience, but exploring that interpretation, there is.
Yeah, there's only the speaking.
Wait,
I just went to speak.
hello. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm just sort of wondering, just on this thing actually that's on the slide, are you meaning this four-way partition to have a natural course, or are you in saying the first option, are you thinking it's just A theory plus A theory experiences, or are you including in that also between A theory plus A theoretic experiences, also plus B theoretic experiences?
That was a great short question.
I don't want to make you run, but and rightly, I do have a all thoughts there. It comes from the fact that I think of these two as metaphysical side as incompatible, and on that question exhaustive. On the question that is.
Yeah, so I was sort of wondering, wait, can I?
Okay, but in that case you have to speak up.
Yes, okay. Yeah, I was, so A, maybe that's fine. And B, I was wondering though, if you had, say again, A theory plus A theoretic experiences and B theoretic experiences, if your responses to the A experiences qua A and B experiences are B could be a little bit different. I mean, I guess yes, but I don't know if you're getting what I'm.
Right. And maybe not. I want to understand that, but maybe we can talk about it.
Yeah, we can talk.
Is that okay?
I'll speak up. So, and I just, I'm struggling with the partly defined through an appeal to experience, because we've got so much, as philosophers, got so much experience with formulating first order theoretical models of time, without even asking whether we're doing metaphysics or whether we're doing philosophy of mind. Say, we use tense logic or something like that for a pretty detailed account of how passage works. And we can do that without tense for a pretty detailed account of a universe, even of a small scene that is entirely free of that kind of passage. So if we can, clearly, I mean, it's at change without any tense. So if we're able to formulate first order models like that, and then now we're taking this to metaphysics and mind, and we're asking, so is that model instantiated in a representation independent way? On the one hand, that gives you one side, that gives you A or B theory, and then you ask, is one or the other model represented in the content of perceptual experience that gives you the other side? So how could that possibly not give you all the options? Where does that not work? And also gives you all the means to discuss the detector argument, which is really just about reliability and not about representation. But can you just tell me where I'm missing something?
Well, let me tell you first how I'm understanding what you're saying. So I think that maybe you're pointing to some costs of this interpretation, because what you're saying, or at least or how I heard it, is that we have all these tools, yes, metaphysical tools, logical tools, to build all sorts of models. I think you
I would just say conceptual tools. Conceptual tools. Then they're not marked as metaphysical.
And to use them to kind of bring them into the metaphysics room and say, well, time might be like this or not. Yeah. So I don't think really I have anything new to say on that point, because it's something we already touched on that I think for me has to do with understanding what those models are saying about time. Because of course, they do need interpreting when we bring them to the temporal metaphysics room. But yeah, I mean, I think that that the standard interpretation has a sort of brings with it a sort of maybe quite nice freedom, free combinability, but also just the freedom in formulating these models without having to worry about the meaning and sort of, in your view, I know, without positing a link between experience and the meaning. I think that is a cost. I think you're saying that you're holding the standard interpretation.
Thanks. So about the deflection is the last part. So I think you're right that if you read the deflation the way they have a way out, and even I mean it's true that I always thought that was in the overall dialectic something that like Chris Miller she did that after. But what you show actually it's true that you can read Christophorus doing something like that. Although it doesn't have a theory of why we do this theoretical mistake. Whereas with this it's similar to this theory in which you have like a misrepresentation of your own experience given how your language works. So you have this general. So because it's very, I think what you say is very illuminating about it's some experiences are mistaken in a way such that we think that all our experiences are. That's true. I mean, if there is an interpretation, it's true that there's a way out of the original problem. But then one might say, well, why exactly that? Then if you have a background theory like the one that Christy has, at least there is a no. Anyway, say that. But can you just say something more about? I didn't understand exactly why you say that. Well, then from that follows leads to the idea that the deflationists can actually deny the neutral characterization. That's because I mean, you said like, oh well, they can deny that we believe that time passes because we have experienced the passage of time in A-theoretic terms. Fine, but that's extra bit is crucial, no? Because the initial characterization is neutral precisely because it's not right.
Right. I think that my answers to the 2 points are related. So let's go back to the proposals. I think there's a number of them, right?
Yes.
See collaborators about. So here's what I take them to be explaining. I take them to be explaining why on the deflationist view, we use of time are subject to the false belief that we experience time as passing. We have experienced as a time passing. And what I at least want to make room for, like as a deflationist view, what I see as a deflationist, some of the deflationist original point is that, so notice that when I outlined this, I said, we as human beings in time make this mistake, we think that we're subject to experience as a time passing. There we have already used the terminology we're attributing to the folk, a mistaken belief that involves A-theoretic content as applied to your own experience. You I want to make room for here is one that gets off the boat sooner than that and doesn't engage with the A-B distinction. As awful as that is, the thought, you know, like that just doesn't take on board the metaphysical machinery that I think is required. And now let me get to the second point. Why do I think that the definitions suggest that truism? So, you know, so we can start with the truism. And it is a truism when we start with it before introducing ABCs. That's what it sounds like a truism, right? But then in order for it to connect up, it's like at some point in the story, I think it turns out we are talking about, if I'm understanding it correctly, A-theoretic passage. It's to do with like, you know, talk about T, you know, whether it's independent. So I want to say that there is a big step. You know, we all say things like, where maybe the term passage comes about, we're English speakers and so on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we're all engaging with this particular as.
Okay, I'll speak now.
Sorry, he's next, and then you. So we have 2 more.
So the thing I get, like with the intelligibility problem, something my voice actually sounds weird.
I can't hear you without.
Oh, really? Loud and weird. So it seems like there are a lot of people being very twitchy about the idea of B-theorists kind of playing like A-theorist rules and using their terminology and talking about passage and things like that. But I mean, as like that, I mean, in terms of framing their view, that might be very useful. It might be the whole point. And if you compare it to an analogy of like, let's say someone looking at an Escher painting, you know, you've got these weird staircases going up the walls and stuff all over the place. And I'm like, it seems like I can coherently say that's an impossible staircase. Now, someone can then come down on me, like they could come down on a B-theorist and go, but you're calling it a staircase, and in order to be a valid staircase, well, it needs to kind of not be impossible because you can't really have an impossible shape. But it seems that I can still kind of gesture to the staircase, like the B-theorists are maybe gesturing to like a primordial confusion about time's passage, right? It seems like that's the whole point, you know, but it isn't possible. There are concepts, a determinate concept of the possible shape.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so I think it's a subtle shift. I want to draw the line at you know, whether I think there is a concept. You know, an intelligible concept. And I think that this shift from, let's say, so the distinction I'm talking about, I see in the history of philosophy time and say, you know, originally, right after Pythagoras and so on, a lot of B-theorists can follow him in saying, yeah, the A-theories is contradictory. It can't exist. But I think that's, that was something that still left Pythagoras thinking he still knows what it would be. It just can't exist. Whereas now we have someone like Simon Prosser, and I think maybe others, B-theorists, certainly him, saying, I have no idea what you're talking about. It's nonsense. I think, I want to draw a line there.
Okay, now this question.
Yes, thank you. So my question is very straightforward. So I'm wondering how would you classify the following view under your scheme? So let's say someone holds the view that we do not experience abilities, so that they agree with us. We cannot experience abilities, but at the same time they hold that experience helps us infer or derive indirectly the fact that the world creates abilities. So we do not experience these abilities, so somehow derive them indirectly afterwards throughout our experience. So would you say that this is a theory, or this? To me, it would fit your definition as a process partly defined by experience, but to be defined in a different way, to be defined indirectly throughout inference rather than experience itself indirectly. So how would that fit into your schema?
Okay, that's the answer to the last question.
I'm not sure if I fully understood, but I think if I've understood you right, this is somebody who doesn't have perceptual temporal experiences with A-theoretic content, but infers that the world is A-theoretic and thinks it is. I think that, strictly speaking, I haven't said anything about, apart from the fact that I've given you an interpretation of A versus B, I haven't said anything about that because so those inferences, there would be part of that sense of temporal experience that I ruled out at the beginning. But yeah, such a person could certainly exist. Now I feel like I'm maybe not getting entirely the question. But
The point is, would a view like this be an A-theory according to your definition?
would it be A-theoretic?
Would it be A-theoretic according to
I see. Okay, so you're asking, could that be A-theoretic? So this person saying, I'm an A-theorist.
But we do not experience A-theory. We do not experience A properties at all. We just infer them indirectly from experience. So we experience an object, an event, but later on we derive A properties after the
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I got it now. I take that on board as an objection, something to think about, because I think it's now that's in number 2 there.
Yeah.
So it goes back to something I said earlier about stretching the meaning of the term, kind of starting a new debate with that same terminology. But yeah, no, thanks.
Excellent. Let's thank Natalja.